All right. It's 10 o'clock, so it's time to start the coffee break. Welcome to this week's coffee break from Long Building Technologies. It's hard to believe that we've been doing this weekly series for almost over a year, for over a year now. With that said, if there is a topic that you'd like us to cover that we haven't covered, or maybe dive down a little deeper, please feel free to contact your sales engineer and make any suggestions that you might have. This week, it's my pleasure to welcome Celeste Cizik from Group 14. Celeste has been heavily involved with the City and County of Denver in planning a path towards net zero energy buildings and reducing gas-fired appliances. Celeste, thank you for joining us today, and take it away.
Great. Thank you for having me. Yeah, so I am with Group 14 Engineering. I'm a principal and a manager there. I oversee our existing buildings group, doing energy and efficiency work for buildings. And I'm going to talk today about Denver's climate action and specifically the Energize Denver task force that I have been heavily involved with. So we'll go over the current requirements and then talk about the proposed policies in two different categories, being efficiency and renewables and electrification, which has been termed renewable heating and cooling to better capture what Denver is really going for when we're talking about electrification. So starting where we're at now, what's currently required in Denver, as I'm sure many of you know, is a benchmarking ordinance that requires all buildings of 25,000 square feet and larger to submit their energy data. This becomes public online, so you can easily see performance, filter for different criteria. Right now, I have this map filtered for Energy Star scores less than 50. So kind of puts out there in the public those lower performing buildings or those really high performing buildings, which might attract tenants or have other advantages. The other current requirement is the Green Building Ordinance. And this started as more of a green roof ordinance. So how this rolled out for existing buildings is it's all tied to a roof replacement. So if you're not replacing a roof, you probably never encountered the Green Building Ordinance in Denver. But if you are replacing your roof, you are required to meet one of these requirements. And this is kind of outlined here, where you have different options in order to meet either with green space, on-site solar. This current requirement has an energy program, which is optional. And really what's kind of being rolled out now is turning that energy program into something that will hopefully become policy. So what's kind of where we're at today? We participated in the 2020 Climate Action Task Force, which looked at all different aspects of emissions and climate change in Denver. So it went well beyond buildings. Group 14 helped that process with technical consulting. So we did a lot of the quantification of the impacts of different ways to address climate change and helping to prepare costs for the city on those different strategies. And what came out of that was some pretty aggressive goals, a recommendation to reduce emissions 100% by 2040, which escalated the previous recommendation of 80% by 2050. Also looked at recommending a ballot measure, which did end up passing. So the city has increased the sales tax rate by 25%, which is expected to generate between $20 and $40 million a year. So this is really huge for the city to be able to actually implement recommendations from the Climate Action Task Force. A huge part of emissions in Denver comes from buildings. You can see these charts over here. Close to half emissions come from buildings and homes, and a big chunk of that is commercial in Denver. So where we're at now, this year, we've been involved in the Energize Denver Task Force. So I'm a member of that task force, and Group 14 is also assisting with a calculation tool to quantify the recommendations from that task force. So we've completed 6 meetings. The 7th meeting is next week. Some of the things I'll talk about today are just draft recommendations. Nothing is policy yet and won't be policy until the recommendations are finalized, and then it will go to the city council. So yeah, don't go saying everything I say today is set in stone, but just wanted to give you all a glimpse of what's being discussed and what could be recommended to city council. So diving in on the efficiency and renewable, I know these next few slides get pretty dense of information, and I'll have contact information at the end to follow up. But wanted to have some of the kind of key pieces of information on the draft recommendations. So what we're looking at recommending for efficiency and renewable is a goal to reduce existing building energy use 30% by 2030. So have a little bit of runway to get out to that reduction goal. And the mechanism that is being recommended is that each building type will have an EUI target, and that's energy use intensity, energy per square foot. So you can see kind of these numbers on this chart here. So maybe for office buildings, that number might be 50, and that trying to get to that in 2030. Each building will have its own trajectory. So each one of these lines is a different building. So if Office A has 100 now, they'll have interim targets of an 83 EUI in 2024 and a 67 EUI in 2027. Looking at including 25,000 square feet and larger, and also crediting solar. This is an important aspect of encouraging to get more renewables on the grid. Denver's trying to get to be 100% renewable electricity by 2030. So anything you can do to encourage solar will really help contribute to that. There will be some alternate compliance paths. If you have the top 15%, you kind of get out of taking any action. And there will be some opportunities to ask for a different timeline or adjust your end goal, or in a couple first having some prescriptive options. So switching over to the renewable heating and cooling. So trying to get all building heating done, or all building everything done with renewable energy, means that we also have to heat with renewable energy. And our only real way to do that is with electricity. So to have a couple of reference studies here of different ways people are implementing that, a lot happening in California and rolling into more colder climates as well. So the electrification recommendations are, instead of focusing on building size or type, it's really focusing on topology of equipment. So looking at the topologies that are easier to electrify, we're definitely heavily involved in upgrades. I know none of this is truly easy, but the kind of first two categories being that furnace and rooftop unit, they're easier. So you can kind of take it off, take a gas-fired unit off, put a heat pump unit on. We are looking at recommending heating source, the heat pumps as a primary heating source, but still allowing gas backup. That was one of the findings from the study that I have referenced here that Denver just published, that going full electric, doing that electric for that peak heating day really jumps up your electric sizing. So you might have to replace panels, you might have to replace wires, and that really jumps up the cost. You can still fully electrify. It's just having that option that you can have that gas backup. So the other two categories, the PTAX being your kind of wall units, there are some options to do heat pumps to replace that, but just not quite as ready for prime time yet. So those dates are a little further out in 2027. And for that boiler topology, this has been a challenging one for folks to look at how you electrify that. It's pretty straightforward to take out a natural gas boiler and put in an electric resistance boiler, but that is very costly to operate, really jumps up your electrical capacity needs. So right now it's required studies and making sure that people look at heat pumps as an option. All of these will be done through the permitting system. So it's been determined that it just isn't feasible to make people rip out perfectly functioning equipment. If you're going to replace it, that's when this will kick in. So looking at that end of life, when you go to get your permit, they'll be making sure that you have the equipment needed if you're in these different categories. Domestic water heating is similar. We're looking at kind of different types of water heating. So that number one there, that kind of tank heater, you can take off natural gas. Did it in my own basement. It's pretty straightforward. You might have some electrical changes, but as far as equipment availability, it is ready for prime time. And three, that bottom one, that kind of point of use, on demand hot water, looking at requiring that as electric resistance allowed. There just really isn't a heat pump available. But since both of those are kind of readily available now, that time frame is that 2023 to do required studies in 2025 for that requirement to use heat pumps or electric resistance. And then that system, that tank with the water heater, that's kind of in that same category as boilers. There are some options now. There's equipment under development. There's kind of first generation equipment that people are using today. So it's not that it's completely unavailable, it's just still pretty challenging, costly, and not quite there yet, but looking at 2027 to do heat pumps if feasible. And this is a summary of the modeling tool that a Group 14 developed. So this gives you that kind of picture every year. Those open bars are the avoided emissions from the policy. So as part of this effort and each different round or discussion, we were putting in different inputs to see the output. So you can see here the kind of where we're getting towards our goal. Not quite all the way to the 13.7 million tons of reduction, but a good chunk of the way there with these policies. And also looking at the avoided social cost of carbon. These measures are costly. Sometimes that can be the focus, but also trying to look at that bigger picture of cost of carbon on the community. Just wanted to point out that equity was a big focus and is a big focus of the task force. And looking at providing support to under-resourced buildings in the form of technical assistance, financial assistance, expedited applications. So it's been discussions throughout how this will impact communities of color, how this will impact under-resourced buildings, and making sure that those supports are in place. So just in conclusion, it's 100% means everything. So while some of these are hard and there are some costs associated with it, we're really looking at doing really electrifying everything. So there's a whole transportation element. We talked about buildings, and yeah, it's a big challenge, but this would help get us quite a way along. And I want to point out where the task force is at now. We have a comment session in a period here. I put in the link that will be posted of how you can get onto a session to provide feedback and learn more. You can also reach out to me directly and I can answer questions and bring comments back to the task force. And that's all I've got, and appreciate the time today.
Yeah, so we have a few minutes, so quick question. Is this going to be, when City Council approves whatever they're going to approve, assuming they approve something, is it going to be codified language that engineers have a prescriptive model to follow? Is it all going to be based on energy models in order to comply with some of the some of the benchmarks and that type of thing? What does that look like?
Yeah, so for the efficiency component, it will all be performance-based. So you'll be submitting through your benchmarking like you already have to do today. And by those dates, you'll have to meet your performance target. Okay. And if you haven't met those performance target, there will be kind of a series of things that happen. Ultimately, could be a fine or a penalty. So it'll be kind of similar to that, how that benchmarking program, it's not really code in the sense of it's not the code that you follow when you're building a building, but it will be policy that the city can enforce and ultimately fine. That's not their goal. They want to reduce emissions, but that is kind of what that would look like. Yeah. And for the equipment replacement, that would be more in the permitting. So there will be kind of requirements when you go to get your permit.
Okay. And then for some of the gas backup heat that would be allowable under some of those scenarios, is that controlled by having through the permitting process and showing a lockout above a certain temperature, or how is that being controlled?
Yeah, I know. As a heavily in the commissioning profession, that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind is like, how do you make sure that gas isn't used all the time?
Right.
And I think that's a challenge. The city is not going to be able to monitor the actual operation. What they'll be looking for in the design documents that you're submitting is that's the intended use of the equipment. That's how it's, the control sequence says it's supposed to operate. We are seeing more equipment that's how it comes packaged controlled, that the heat pump is the primary. So that's what they're going to be looking for. If you're overriding that and down the field later on, unfortunately, it's something that won't be in their control, but they're going to make sure you have that equipment.
Okay, all right. Well, Celeste, thank you. I greatly appreciate you joining us today. I think it's readily apparent to all of us that there's a big push for municipalities across the U.S. towards greater building energy efficiency and less reliance on gas-fired heating appliances. So this is timely. As we have highlighted in previous coffee break presentations, equipment such as heat pumps, heat recovery and heat pump chillers, DOAS units with air source heat pumps, all of these types of equipments are becoming more and more part of the conversation and higher interest in our region than they have in years past. So feel free to reach out to a sales engineer at Long. Celeste has offered her contact info here today. Feel free to reach out and for any brainstorming when it comes to equipment selections and such. All, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.